I've been running STR profiles at a forensic lab in Houston for 6 years. And until last February, I thought the worst thing that could happen at work was a contamination event that made you redo a batch. I still think that, technically. But now the word contamination means something different to me, and I keep the printout in a locked drawer at home because I don't know what else to do with it. The sample came in on a Tuesday morning. Sexual assault kit, swab from under the fingernails of a victim in A-Leaf. She was still in the hospital. The detective who dropped off the paperwork was a woman named Raina, and she asked how fast we could turn it around. I told her the usual, 3 to 5 business days if nothing was weird. She said the guy had followed the victim from a gas station on Bel Air, and she wanted him off the street. I told her I'd push it. I don't want to make this sound dramatic. It was a normal morning. I had a coffee from the Shell on Fondren going cold on my bench, my badge clipped to my belt loop, and my supervisor was arguing with someone in the hallway about a broken thermocycler. The lab smelled like it always smells. Bleach and the kind of dry, recycled air that gives you a nosebleed by March. I extracted the DNA myself. Chilex prep, quantified it on the plate reader, ran the amp, loaded the capillary. Everything by the book, my initials on every tube. I logged the reagent lot numbers. I remember thinking that the yield looked clean, higher than I expected off a fingernail swab. That was the only thing about the run that stood out at the time. The results came back about 6 hours later. I pulled them up on the workstation after lunch. I have this habit where I glance at the electropherogram first, before I even look at the sample ID, just to see if it's a clean single-source profile or a mixture. This one was clean, beautifully clean. 16 loci, sharp peaks, no allele dropout. I remember smiling, because you don't get profiles like that off fingernail scrapings. It's usually a smear of the victim's own DNA with something faint underneath. Then I compared it to the elimination profile in the case folder, which is just the victim's DNA, so we can subtract it out. The match ratio wasn't to the victim. It flagged something else. Our software runs an automatic check against staff profiles, because if I sneeze into a tube, I want to know. Every person who works in the lab has their DNA on file. It's called an elimination database. The staff match came back as me. I actually laughed, out loud, at my desk, because obviously I'd screwed up somewhere. Everyone contaminates a sample at some point in their career. It's embarrassing, but it happens. And my first thought was that I'd left a stray skin cell in the extraction hood, and now I had to write it up and eat the redo. I closed the report, opened it again to make sure I'd read it right, and then I went and got another coffee. Here's the thing though, the match wasn't partial. It wasn't the kind of edge case where 3 or 4 loci overlap because 2 people happen to share alleles. It was every single locus, 16 out of 16. The likelihood ratio was in the quadrillions. In court, we call that an identification. Statistically, you say it's the same person, full stop. There's a specific way it feels to look at your own electropherogram. The lab uses this software, where each locus shows up as a little window, and inside each window there are 2 peaks, one from each parent. I know mine. I've stared at my elimination profile more times than I can count, mostly for quality drills. When the case sample came up on the second monitor, I didn't have to compare, I just knew. The D3S1358 peaks were mine. The VWA was mine. The FGA. Every locus, my own face staring back at me from the screen. I told myself, contamination. I redid the extraction from the original swab. Fresh gloves, fresh tips, a hood I hadn't used all week. And I made a coworker watch me do it, just so I had a witness. I ran it again. Same result. My own DNA, off a swab from a stranger's fingernails in A-Leaf, a neighborhood I have driven through maybe twice in my life. I want you to understand what that means. Technically. It doesn't mean my DNA is similar to the perpetrator's. It means the material that this woman scraped out from under her nails while fighting off an attacker came from a body that has, at the cellular level, the same genome as me. There are 2 ways that happens. 1, the sample got contaminated with my DNA at some point between the swab being collected and me loading the plate. 2, it didn't. I checked the chain of custody first. The kit had been sealed at the hospital. The tamper tape was intact when I opened it. It went from the sexual assault nurse examiner, into an evidence bag, into a locked drop box at HPD, into the vault at our lab, and onto my bench. I wasn't in the vault. I wasn't at the hospital. I wasn't at the gas station on Bel Air that night. I was at home watching the Rockets lose to Denver, and my girlfriend was on the couch next to me the entire game. I checked the reagents. Lot numbers matched. Controls were clean. The negative control on my run was flat. No peaks, no background. If I'd contaminated the run with my own cells, my DNA should have shown up in the negative too, at least faintly. It didn't. My DNA only appeared where the victim's fingernail swab was supposed to be. I sat with that for a while. I remember the AC kicking on and the paper on the corkboard lifting a little. I went to my supervisor, a guy named Colin. I didn't tell him the whole thing. I said I had a suspected contamination event on a case. I wanted to void the result and re-swab. He shrugged and said, "Fine, happens to everyone. Don't beat yourself up." I filled out the deviation form. I wrote, "Possible contamination during extraction, source unclear, recommend recollection," in the notes field. That is not what I actually thought had happened, but it was the only sentence I could write that didn't sound insane. Raina wasn't happy. She drove out to the hospital, got a second set of fingernail clippings from the victim, brought them in personally, and stood in the reception area with her arms crossed until I signed for them. I ran that batch alone. I stayed after hours. I did every step twice. I ran the amp overnight and came in at 6 the next morning to check the plate. The second sample gave a clean profile too. Male, single source, 16 loci. It wasn't me. I don't know who it was. He wasn't in CODIS, at least not yet. I released that result, wrote up the case, and Raina took it from there. I don't know what happened to the guy. Sometimes I look up the case number to see if there was an arrest. There hasn't been. The problem is the first result. Because if the first result was contamination, if somehow my cells ended up in that specific tube and nowhere else in the run, then the world still makes sense. Just a fluke I can't explain. Fine, I could live with that. But if it wasn't contamination, then somebody's biological material was under that woman's fingernails. And that material has the same DNA as mine. There are exactly 2 ways that happens outside of a lab error. Either I have an identical twin I don't know about, or somebody planted a sample of me at a crime scene in A-Leaf. I've thought about the twin thing. I was adopted at 11 months. I have the paperwork. My birth mother's name is on it, first name only, and a note that she declined further contact. I never looked for her. For years, I figured whoever she was, she had her reasons and that was enough. Now I catch myself thinking about it in the shower, or driving home on the 610 loop, wondering if there's a version of me out there who grew up somewhere else and turned into something I wouldn't want to meet. The other option is worse, in a way. Planting DNA isn't hard if you know what you're doing. A used coffee cup, a cigarette butt off the sidewalk. Anyone who has ever sat behind me on a bus could technically have my DNA in a Ziploc bag. Somebody in this lab would know exactly how much of a swab to seed to make a good profile. I try not to think about who that could be. It's not a useful thought. I still keep the first printout at home. I don't know why. I have it in a manila envelope inside a locked file drawer, along with my passport and the deed to my car. Every couple of months I take it out and look at the peaks, all 16 of them, matching me down to the last allele, just to remind myself I didn't imagine it. I still work at the lab. I still run cases. I use fresh gloves, fresh tips, a clean hood every time, the way I always have. Nothing has come back with my name on it since. Whenever a fingernail swab lands on my bench, I read the case narrative first now, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to stay blind. I read it anyway. I look at the address and the description of the suspect and the date, and I check them against my own life. Every time so far they haven't matched. Every time so far. I've been running a lathe on the same shop floor in Detroit for 12 years. Same building off McNichols. Same locker, same smell of coolant and burnt steel in your clothes when you drive home. Night shift mostly. I liked it. Fewer people, less noise from the offices upstairs, And if you did your job right, nobody bothered you. Then they put Dwayne on as foreman, not new to the plant. He'd been there almost as long as me, just on the day side. And there was always something about him people didn't quite trust. Not dirty, not lazy, just fast in a way that made you nervous. Guys said he'd take shortcuts when the numbers looked bad on a Friday. I didn't have an opinion. I'd never worked under him. First night he had my line, he came around with a stack of QA tickets, acceptance forms, one per batch. Normally you check the parts against the print, gauge the critical dimensions, sign, initial, date. Takes real time. Not forever, but real. He pushed the stack across my bench and said, "Just sign them. It's all fine. Save us both an hour." I laughed at first because I thought he was kidding. He wasn't kidding. I said, "Dwayne, I gotta measure them." He said, "You already know what they look like. It's the same job we ran in November. Just sign." That's how it started. Not a threat, not a fight. Just a guy at your elbow telling you the boring thing you're supposed to do is a waste of both your time. I signed nothing that night. Told him I'd measure and sign in the morning like I always did. He shrugged and walked off. I remember watching him at the far end of the aisle, standing under one of the sodium lamps by the tool crib, talking to one of the newer guys. That guy signed his stack in about 40 seconds. For the next couple weeks, it kept coming up, sometimes friendly. "Come on, man, we're behind." Sometimes not. "You want to be the reason we miss shipment again?" I kept measuring. I signed what checked out, kicked back what didn't. That's the job. Then, in the middle of January, we got hit with one of those cold snaps where you can hear the roof creak. 2 nights in a row, it was under 10 degrees outside, and the heaters on the west end of the shop kept dropping out. My hands stayed stiff, even inside gloves. I remember the coolant on the tray had this thin scum on top from where the temperature had dropped near the loading dock. Everybody was miserable. Everybody wanted out early. Dwayne came around that Thursday with a thicker stack than usual, told me the customer wanted an early truck, told me the day shift had already signed off on half the batch, and I just needed to close the rest. Then he leaned on my bench, close enough I could smell the coffee and Skoal on him, and said, 12 years is a long time to still be running a machine." He said it like a favor, like he was reminding me of something I might have forgotten. I told him I would get to them. He walked off, and I stood there for a minute with my hands on the ways of the lathe, feeling the vibration through the cast iron. And I thought about my kids' braces and the second mortgage, and the fact that promotions on our floor went through the foreman first. Then I picked up the calipers and started measuring. The first 3 parts were fine. 4th one was off. Not a lot. A shoulder diameter came in about 4 thousandths under the low limit on the print. Not something you'd catch by eye. You'd have to gauge it. I set it aside. Measured the next one, also under. Not by the same amount, but under. I pulled 10 more out of the tote at random. 7 of them were out of spec on that same feature. All under, never over. That's not random noise. Random noise scatters both sides of nominal. This was a tool that had walked, or a program somebody had edited, or an offset nobody had corrected. Whatever it was systematic. I sat down on the stool by my bench and looked at the pile for a while. The part was a suspension component, not the piece that fails and kills somebody by itself, but a piece that lives inside an assembly that carries load. Undersize on that shoulder meant a looser fit than the engineer wanted. Under vibration, over time, on a bad road, that kind of loose fit is how things start to work themselves apart. I checked the travelers. The batches went back 3 weeks, all signed. Some by me, on parts I had actually measured and that had actually been fine. Some by 2 other guys on other shifts. Some by nobody I could read. And I remembered Dwayne standing under the sodium lamp with that new kid. I want to be honest about what I did next because it wasn't brave. I went home at the end of shift and I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the light off and watched the sky go gray over the neighbor's fence, and I ran the math on getting fired. 12 years of seniority, health insurance. My wife works retail. If I walked into HR and made this somebody's problem, I knew how it would go. Not fired, probably, but marked. The kind of marked where you stay on nights forever, and the raises stop, and the overtime dries up, and one day they restructure, and your name is on the list. I already knew all that before I sat down. I think I just needed to sit with it. The next night I came in early, went to my locker, got out the little black notebook I keep for tool offsets, and started a fresh page. I wrote down batch numbers, part numbers, measured actuals against the print with the gauge I used and the serial on the gauge, dates the travelers were signed, whose initials were on them. I did it for every tote I could get my hands on without making it obvious. Took me 2 shifts. Dwayne came by both nights, asked if I'd finished the stack from Thursday. I told him I was still working through it. He didn't push. That worried me more than if he had pushed. The second night, around 3 in the morning, I logged into the corporate system on the shared terminal in the break room. We had this internal thing, a compliance portal, that HR had rolled out during COVID. Nobody used it. It let you file a quality concern straight to the plant QA manager, bypassing your supervisor. There was a box that said, "Do you want your identity shared with your direct supervisor?" I clicked no. I attached photos of the notebook pages. I attached photos of the parts on the bench with the calipers on them, and the display readable. I wrote maybe 6 sentences. Batch numbers, feature, measured, print. Not accusations, just numbers. I hit submit, and I stood there in the break room with the fluorescent light buzzing over my head and the vending machine humming, and I felt, honestly, sick. Then I went back and finished my shift. Nothing happened for 4 days. That was the worst part. 4 days of coming in and running my machine and watching Dwayne walk the aisle like normal. And every time he looked at me, I was sure he knew. On the 5th day, 2 people from QA came down to the floor with a cart. Not the usual guys. The manager himself and one of the engineers from the 2nd floor, in a button-down under his jacket, which nobody wears on the floor. They pulled totes, not just mine. A lot of totes. They took them upstairs, then a week of quiet, then a partial recall on 2 of the batches that had already shipped. Not a public thing, an internal thing. The customer had them pulled from their line before they went into anything final. Nothing failed in the field. Nobody got hurt. It didn't make the news because there was no news to make. I heard about Dwayne from the guy on the grinder next to me. Written up. Formal warning in the file. Moved off the night rotation to some kind of process role where he doesn't sign travelers anymore. He didn't get fired. I didn't expect him to. Guys like that rarely do. He knew it was me. He had to. There aren't that many people who could have caught what I caught, and I was the one who'd been telling him no for a month. He never said a word to me about it. Not one. We passed each other in the parking lot 2 weeks later, near the fence by the salt pile, and he just nodded, the way you nod at a stranger holding a door. The lead spot on our line opened up in March. I didn't get it. They gave it to a guy with 5 years in. I wasn't surprised, and I wasn't angry, because I'd already sat at my kitchen table and priced that out before I ever touched the compliance portal. You don't get to file that kind of report and then also get the promotion. That's not how the building works. I knew that going in. I'm still on nights. Same locker, same lathe, same smell in my jacket when I get home. I measure every part on my bench the way I always did. I sign what checks out. I kick back what doesn't. If somebody on 2nd shift is out there right now signing tickets they shouldn't be signing, that's their notebook to keep, not mine. I just wanted to be able to drive home and not think about somebody's axle. The last of my friends left around 9:30. Marcus wanted to grab beers somewhere in the Pearl District before he drove back to Eugene, and I almost said yes, but I was too tired to fake it. I walked him down to the parking lot, watched his taillights turn onto Burnside, and stood there in my socks for a second because the concrete was still warm from the day. Then I went back up to 4B and locked the door behind me. That was the moment it hit. Not when I signed the lease, not when I loaded the U-Haul in Boise 3 days earlier, not even when I unpacked the coffee maker. It was the click of the deadbolt. The apartment was almost empty. A mattress on the floor of the bedroom, no frame yet. A folding camp chair I'd bought at Fred Meyer that afternoon. 2 lamps, 1 working. Boxes stacked against the wall like a very sad Tetris game. The kitchen had a plate, a fork, a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest brother," and a half-eaten bag of Doritos my buddy Cole had left on the counter. That was it. That was my whole life at 24. I sat down on the floor by the window. The building was one of those older brick things off Northeast 21st. 4 stories, radiators that clank, hardwood floors that creak when a fly lands on them. From the window, I could see the top of a fir tree and the corner of a laundromat sign across the street, blinking red in the mist. It had rained earlier. Everything smelled like wet asphalt through the cracked window. I thought I would feel good, free maybe, grown up. This was supposed to be the moment. First place with my name on the lease. No roommates, no parents down the hall. Just me and a whole apartment in a city I had picked myself. Instead, I sat there and listened. I had never been in a silence like that. My parents' house in Idaho always had something. My dad's TV in the basement, my mom running the dishwasher, the dog, the neighbor's kid learning drums. College dorms were basically noise machines with beds inside. Even my last place in Boise, the shared one, always had somebody's shower running or an Xbox controller getting slammed into a couch cushion. Here, nothing. The fridge hummed. That was the only real sound. I could hear the fridge from 2 rooms away. I got up, walked to the kitchen, opened it, closed it. Just to break the hum for a second. Then I stood in the middle of the living room and did that thing where you don't know what to do with your hands. I checked my phone. 9:42. Way too early to go to sleep. Too late to start hanging things up. I opened Instagram, scrolled for maybe 40 seconds, closed it. Opened it again, closed it. Everyone was doing something. Cole had already posted a story from a bar on Hawthorne. Marcus was probably halfway to the interstate. My cousin was at a wedding in Denver. Everyone was in motion, and I was sitting on a hardwood floor in Portland, listening to a refrigerator. That was when the building started to talk. I don't mean anything spooky, I mean pipes. Old buildings have pipes, and when the guy above you takes a shower, the whole west wall makes this long, low groan like a whale. First time I heard it, I actually stood up. I thought something was wrong. Then I heard water running, and I remembered the leasing agent saying, "Oh yeah, you'll hear the neighbors. It's charming, isn't it?" The pipes stopped. The hum came back. I tried to eat. I opened the Doritos, ate 3, felt worse, put them back on the counter, drank water out of the mug. The water in Portland tastes different than Boise water, softer. Or maybe I was just paying attention to things I never paid attention to before, because there was nothing else in my head. Somewhere down on the sidewalk, a girl laughed. One of those short, surprised laughs, like a friend had said something dumb. Then footsteps, then nothing. I don't know why, but that was almost worse than the fridge. Knowing that people were out there, right below the window, having whole conversations, and I couldn't hear any of them clear enough to feel included. I went into the bedroom, stood over the mattress. It looked so small on the floor with no frame, like a raft. I thought about texting my mom, something casual. Made it in, everything's fine. But she'd already gotten that text at 4 when we were unloading. Texting her again at 10 would be a flag. She'd call. And if she called, I'd have to keep my voice steady, and I wasn't sure I could. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. You can be excited about something for months. You can be the one who chose it. You can be the one who filled out the application and paid the deposit and signed the 12-month lease with your own hand. And then the door closes, and you sit down, and your chest does this weird thing where it feels like a floor giving out. Just a little, just an inch. And you think, oh, this is what people meant. I walked back out to the living room. The laundromat sign was still blinking. A car went by on 21st, and I could hear the tires on the wet street from all the way up on the 4th floor. I looked at the boxes. I could unpack. That would kill time. But I didn't want to unpack in the dark with one working lamp and feel like a raccoon going through my own life. I could put on a show, but I hadn't set up the TV, and watching something on my laptop, sitting on a folding chair, felt like it would make the room bigger somehow, more empty. So I just sat there, on the floor, back against the wall by the window, knees up. I remember thinking, very clearly, this is the first night. Every night after this is going to be easier than this one. If I can get through the next 4 hours, I've done it. That's the deal. And then my phone rang. It was on the floor next to me, screen down, and when it lit up and buzzed against the hardwood, the sound was so loud I actually flinched, full body. Like somebody had clapped behind my head. I flipped it over. Mom. I don't know why I stared at it for 2 full rings before I answered. Maybe I was still catching my breath. Maybe I didn't want her to hear whatever was in my throat. I pulled it together, cleared it, and picked up on the 4th ring. Hey, honey. Her voice was normal. The same voice she uses when she's calling to ask what size shoe my dad wears now, because his feet keep changing apparently. Just checking in. I'm good, I said. Just, sitting. Sitting where? On the floor, by the window. Okay. A little pause. Not a worried pause, just a mom pause. You eat anything? Doritos. That is not dinner. I know. And that was it. That was the whole opening. She didn't push. She didn't ask if I was lonely. She didn't do the thing where a parent tries to make you say the sad thing out loud. She just moved on. She started telling me about the grocery run I needed to do tomorrow. Get the bigger bottle of dish soap. It's cheaper per ounce. Don't buy the pre-cut onions. They go bad in 2 days and taste like the fridge. There's a Trader Joe's on Northeast Broadway. She looked it up. It's a 9-minute drive. Get frozen dumplings. Everybody needs frozen dumplings in the freezer. It's a rule. Then she started on the shelves I said I wanted to put up over the desk. She had opinions. She always has opinions about shelves. She wanted to know if the walls were plaster or drywall, because you need different anchors. And I said I didn't know, and she said knock on it and tell her what it sounds like. I actually got up and knocked on the wall by the window while she was on the line, and she said, drywall. Get the plastic anchors, not the metal ones. The metal ones are overkill and they wreck the wall when you move out. I said okay. I wrote it down on the back of a Doritos receipt. We talked about my dad's tomato plants, which were dying because he keeps overwatering them and won't listen. We talked about my aunt's dog, who is 15 and refuses to die, and everyone respects him for it. His name is Beans. He has 3 teeth and he can still open the pantry door with his nose. Mom said he opened it that morning and ate half a bag of shredded coconut and threw up in my aunt's slippers. And my aunt was somehow more impressed than mad. We talked about whether I should get a rug for the living room because hardwood floors get cold in Portland in October, and I would not enjoy that. She said measure the room tomorrow. She said take a picture and send it to her. She'd help me pick one. She said don't spend more than $150 because you can find a good one for that. At some point I got up and moved to the mattress, sat on the edge of it, then lay back on it, with one arm behind my head, phone against my ear. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner shaped a little like Michigan. I stared at it while she talked about the price of gas in Boise. An hour, almost exactly. When I looked at the screen it said 10:53, and I hadn't noticed a single minute of it pass. Okay, she said finally. I'll let you go. You've had a big day. Yeah, sleep, honey. Call me tomorrow when you're at the store. I will. Love you. Love you too. She hung up first. She always hangs up first. It's a thing she does, so I don't have to. I lay there on the mattress with the phone on my chest. The fridge was still humming. The pipes made their wail noise again. Somebody upstairs washing dishes, probably. Somewhere on the street a car went by, tires on wet asphalt, that same soft sound. None of it had changed. The apartment was the same. The boxes were still stacked. The one lamp was still on. The laundromat sign was still blinking red through the bedroom window in a stripe across the wall. But the quiet felt different. I don't know how else to say it. Before the call, the quiet had a weight to it, like it was leaning on me. After, it was just quiet. Like a room, not a hand. I think that was the first time I understood the difference between being alone and being by yourself. One of them shows up whether you want it or not. The other one you pick. You sign a lease for it. You drive a U-Haul across state lines for it. You sit on your own floor at 24 with a bag of Doritos and a mug you got in 8th grade and you pick it. I turned off the lamp. The laundromat sign kept blinking, red, 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 through the window. I closed my eyes and listened to the fridge for a while, and then I didn't hear it anymore, and then I was asleep.